We're going to start today with the Supreme Court and more news of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's undisclosed freebies from wealthy pals, as Rolling Stone is calling them. There's really three stories here, and we're going to talk about all three. There's the specifics about what's happening with Clarence Thomas. There are the broader questions of what should be done, if anything, with the Supreme Court. And then there is the question of, more broadly, what about 2024, now that we know the havoc that 2016's presidential election has had on the Supreme Court and, as a result, on the country? Let's start with the specifics of Clarence Thomas. Rolling Stone reports investigation uncovers more of Clarence Thomas's undisclosed freebies from wealthy pals. The Supreme Court justice's rich friends at the Horatio Alger Association have showered him with benefits, including lavish vacations and funds for a fawning documentary about his life. This is no longer the exception to what's going on. We now have so many examples of this, including, of course, Harlan Crow and what we learned some months ago, I believe it was, but now we have even more. Look at some of the details. Clarence Thomas's connections to wealthy and expensive vacations run deeper than billionaire businessman and Nazi enthusiast Harlan Crow. The New York Times reports that Thomas has milked relationships with the rich he made through the Horatio Alger Association of Distinguished Americans. Because of their Horatio Alger connections, Thomas and his spouse, Virginia, have been invited to join luxurious vacations and parties in addition to getting VIP access to sports events. Thomas also rubbed elbows with the likes of Oprah Winfrey and Ed McMahon during a lavish 3-day Montana birthday party for billionaire industrialist Dennis Washington. The connections Thomas made through Horatio Alger have benefited him beyond just lavish trips. His contacts, including Washington investor David Sokol, formerly of Berkshire Hathaway, helped fund a documentary that paints Thomas in a heroic light. And it totally rewrites history on the Anita Hill confirmation hearings. And there are all sorts of other examples. The gifts include flights on private planes, cigars, clothing, etc., etc. After 2004, when the LA Times reported on his disclosures, Thomas ceased reporting to the court gifts and benefits that he received. A ProPublica investigation this year uncovered his relationship with Crow, including private jet flights, yacht trips, all of it. Crow paying tuition for Thomas's nephew, who the Thomases were raising, and it goes on and on and on. And the list is exactly what you would imagine. If you're really interested in the specific details, you can certainly read the entire reporting, but I think you sort of get the picture. So then we get to the implications and the meaning of all of this. First and foremost, we have a particular situation where, between his wife, Virginia, and her involvement in the effort to overturn the 2020 election results, Thomas's lack of recusal on related matters, the ethical questions, all of these different things. At a basic core level, we can see that the Supreme Court doesn't actually have the checks, balances, and accountability methods that it should have. This is very similar to what we saw during Trump's presidency. We learned that the checks and balances put in place by the framers of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, etc., they never accounted for someone like Trump willing to flout all of those conventions. They just didn't. And so what we saw was that we don't have a firm or rigid enough set of checks and balances to control a president like Donald Trump. We just don't have it. Similarly, we are finding that the same applies to the Supreme Court. And so do we need some kind of transparency and ethics reform on the Supreme Court? Of course we do. Ethics rules need to be strengthened. Transparency requirements need to be strengthened. There need to be clearer guidelines for recusal, stricter guidelines for disclosure of financial interests and gifts, actual limitations on the gifts and favors that you're allowed to accept, which could create a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest. We need all of those things, and this gets us into the reform part. I know that there are some in my audience who say Joe Biden should pack the court. By packing the court, we mean adding seats to the Supreme Court, such that if you expand the court, say from 9 to 13 seats by adding 4, and then immediately select those 4 Supreme Court justices, You could take control of the court in the sense that by adding 4 liberal justices, you then take control back. I love the idea of taking control back. The problem I see is that it really is opening the door to Republicans doing the same the next time they have a president in the White House, and then Democrats doing the same. And next thing you know, we've got 17, 19, 21, 23 seats. It doesn't seem to me like really the path forward just because Biden can get away with it right now. Now, if Biden did it and we got a more liberal Supreme Court and we got some good decisions, would I complain? Of course I wouldn't complain, but I question its viability as a long-term strategy. What I would like to see, in addition to the transparency and ethics reform I just mentioned, includes term limits on the Supreme Court. I believe we should have term limits for Supreme Court justices. We have 9 justices. You figure out the math of it, figure out the term limits, figure out the cadence, and then you know in advance, instead of wondering, okay, if Trump beats Hillary, he might get 1, 2, or 3 justices. We would know exactly the number that the next president would get. It might make it more concrete when we talk about the importance of voting for the right president based on Supreme Court selections, which I will get to in a moment. So I believe term limits would be a great thing to do. Balanced representation is also an interesting idea. I'm not talking about you need a black woman and an Asian dude and then a person in a wheelchair. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about ensuring or requiring that you need a certain number of justices from different legal backgrounds. So you could say, well, you must have a justice whose background is civil rights, public defense, public interest law, or whatever the case may be. This would widen the perspective on the court. I think that that's a useful reform, and there are others. Would I be glad for Joe Biden to add 4 justices and take control of the court? Sure. Do I think it's the long-term solution? I don't. Lastly, let us again remember, we would not be in this mess. I mean, Clarence Thomas would be on the court, but what I mean is we would not have one of the most right-wing courts in decades overturning Roe v. Wade, making the decisions they've made with regard to voting rights and so many other things, if Hillary Clinton had defeated Donald Trump in 2016. I don't say that to lay blame. I don't say that for any reason other than there's another election coming up in 16 months, 11 and 12, 16 months, 15 and a half months. This is happening again. It is quite plausible that there will be 2 Supreme Court nominations for whoever wins in November of 2024 to make during the following 4 years. Plausible, maybe even likely. Let's not make that mistake from 2016 again. One of our sponsors is Zippix nicotine toothpicks. Don't you think it's time you stopped putting smoke and vape oils in your lungs? Zippix toothpicks are a convenient way to curb the nicotine cravings. Zippix toothpicks are super discreet. You can use them anytime, anywhere smoking and vaping aren't allowed, including flights, sporting events, in restaurants. They're available in 6 different flavors with options of 2 and 3 milligrams of nicotine. If you're not a nicotine user, Zippix also offers caffeine and B12 infused toothpicks. Zippix has already helped tens of thousands of customers ditch the cigarettes, ditch the vapes. They might be able to help you too. If you're a smoker or a vapor, give Zippix toothpicks a try. Your lungs will thank you. Go to zippixtoothpicks.com today. Save 10% with the code PACMAN10 at checkout. Just remember, you must be 21 or older to order. The link is down below.